My name is Marc Jordan, and you've got me for about the next 20 minutes. I'm losing my voice at the moment though, so if anyone can not hear me at the back, just make some arm signs or signals or whatever, and I'll try and speak up. But I promise tomorrow I'll be all the rage at the party and ready to chat. So I'm here today to talk to you about adding identity to your app for your customers and your partners. I lead a couple of products at Google. I lead our Firebase authentication product, really helping mobile app developers add seamless login experiences to their apps. I also lead our identity platform product, and that's really about helping huge multi-tenant SaaS applications be successful with the right levels of security. And so work closely with the Beyond Corp team, the Fido team, and others to ensure that you have a defense in depth strategy when you're building apps and services that you're exposing to your customers, to your partners, or to anybody else. So we've got a couple of different pieces I want to talk about today. First, a customer identity is really that different. We often hear about B2E, business to enterprise. We hear about B2B, business to business, sort of the SaaS model, and we hear about B2C. And I just want to sort of start to talk through, why should we think differently about those, and how does Google think about those, and give you some sort of things to mull on and take away, or ask me during the Q&A at the end. I want to talk to you about security without obscurity. So I'm not sure how many of you in the audience have signed up for some consumer app, or your business has onboarded some new SaaS application, and you've gone to log in and you're like, what the heck is going on? Like, I have to enter all these fields, I have to sign up for a new MFA method, maybe I have to install a new app and things like that. And it's really a bad user experience. And so I want to take you through some of the ways that we think about that. And finally, talk a little bit about how can you package all that up and just drop it into your app and not have to worry about different app developers writing different pieces of code that look different, that feel different. So customers have disjoint experiences from app 1 that your company might be building versus app 2 and app 3 and so on and so forth. So let's kind of dive into it. When we look at services, customer identities are just worlds away from B2E and B2B style applications. And they vary in a number of different ways, and I'll cover a few here. So in terms of scale, sorry, my clicker's a little funny. When we look at scale and compare employee identities versus customer identities, we just see magnitudes higher. And what that means is that your traditional databases, directories, authentication systems, they don't perform in a way that suits these volume of users, that supports the use cases that these customers and partners might have. And so I've got some sort of fairly anonymized examples down the bottom here. But as you have a look at it, we're talking about billions of users when we talk about consumer applications. At this point, Google has 8 applications that have over 1 billion users each. And so we've learned some things when you have multiple billions of users accessing services, accessing front ends and things like that. And that looks very different to Google that has roughly 100,000 employees and 200,000 including all of our vendors and contractors and things like that. So it's a very different paradigm and very different solutions that you need to enact and show to your end users versus what it looks like for us employees. And so the delivery method is also quite different. So if you think about the last time you onboarded to an organization, you changed jobs or something like that, employees have a very curated experience when they get onboarded. They get an app or service or multiple apps and services delivered to them via a dashboard or via a portal or via installed software that might exist on their computer. With consumers, you don't have that luxury. You can't curate the apps, the app delivery methodology and things like that. Like, it's a very different installation method, onboarding method. And I don't know about everyone in the room, but when I have to call a company to have my consumer credentials reset or changed or modified, I recently got a new phone and forgot to move an authenticator over. Oh my gosh. All of these things are really challenging as a consumer and just get in the way of onboarding into a new app. I've got some slides in a minute, but we find when we talk to customers, spend a lot of time talking to app developers, long forms, confusing experiences, things like that actually reduce the number of people signing up for an application. Like it is shown, the more data you ask for at the front door, the smaller the funnel will be of users that are actually onboarding to your application. And this all comes down to, for consumer applications, for B2B applications, the user experience is king. And so if you're not showing the right UX, if you're introducing friction, if there's things that slow people down, all of these things will reduce the overall volume of users you'll get inside of your app. And I often say it inside of my team, I don't know about all of you, but oftentimes companies are building apps, consumer apps in particular, to drive their business, to drive their revenue, to increase their reputation and to improve their reputation in the audience, with the audience that they're targeting. And if you have a really, really bad experience at the front door, that says a lot about your company, about your reputation and things like that. And so it's really, really critical. In order to drive your bottom line, having the best first impression is the most important thing that we can think of from an app development standpoint. So the security paradigms are also a little bit different. I'm not sure how many of you attended Christian's FIDO session this morning, but we do see very, very different methodologies for how people secure the accounts that are accessing consumer applications. So just out of interest, does anyone use a security key at work at the moment? A few of you? Outside of your Google account, I'll make that, how many of you use a security key for a consumer app that you log into? A couple? Okay, a couple? All right, awesome. So it's starting to shift, and we're starting to make strides in order to make that delivery method a little bit more, accommodating, I guess, for the consumer audience. But recovering these methods and recovering these sort of protocols and like FIDO-based factors and things like that become really, really difficult to recover based on having to send keys out and things like that. It's much easier in an enterprise sense. We also, does anyone use a smart card at work? I used a smart card for a lot of years. A few as well, a couple. Okay, that number's getting smaller and smaller. And mobile apps and things like that. Like you've got an OTP, you might have an authenticator app and things like that. So we often see these inside of enterprise security. And some of them are definitely shifting into the consumer world, but it's going to take time. And traditionally in consumer security, B2B security, we see things like SMS. We see email. As recently as this morning, I got an email in order to verify my account creation. And things like security questions, something you know and something you know, are still pretty common in this world. And so one of my goals is to try and shift some of the things on the left to the right without diminishing that user experience. And something that I sort of would love everyone in this room as a shared mind to start to think, how can we offer amazing security that's so good that a user is these are the most secure that they can be without ever having friction, without ever having conflicts in their life, without ever causing trouble for them and recovery problems and things like that. And the last sort of way that we think about them being different is on diversity. And the reason I bring this up is the next time you go to develop an app, I would love all of us to think about or offer an app to your customers, to your partners and things like that. Some of these key paradigms are really, really important to think about to ensure that you're delivering the most value to your partners and to your customers. And honestly, they look really different. You're going to have a broad range of customers that might get access to your app from different geos and things like that, different apps on their phone, different devices that they have in their hand, different operating systems and everything else. And so accommodating that broad swath of diversity can often be quite challenging. And the last point here is really important to me. Customers and partners have chosen you. They have downloaded your app, they're taking a chance, they've read your app store reviews, they've gone to your website and bought into the hype. They've decided they're going to commit to you and they're going to trust you and they're going to do these things. And so being a good custodian, being a good partner for the customer is ultimately one of the really, really important things that we think of. So how can we deliver on some of this, in particular around security, without obscuring the experience, without driving really strange end-user experiences? If you haven't seen one of these headlines in the news in the last decade, then you're probably not reading the right newspapers. We see these all the time. There is always something going on. And it's really important that none of you end up with your name on a newspaper page like this, and it's really important to us. So we're starting to get there, slowly. But even for Google accounts, which I would argue are some of the, give you some of the best options, the most flexible options for securing your account, we still see less than 10% adoption of strong factors. And that's really challenging for me. We only see 12% of Americans using password managers. And what that probably means is that people have the same password on every site that they're accessing, or at least a broad swath of them. And again, these numbers are slowly increasing, but these add friction. Having to add 2FA adds an extra step. Having to go to my password manager and select the credential and things like that adds friction. And so how can we start to deliver better experiences without needing to reuse credentials, not turn two-factor authentication methods on, and things like that? And as I've been saying, so friction really does hurt adoption. 56% of people haven't signed up to a service because the sign-up form was too complex, which is astonishing. So they've gone all the way to get to the website or download the application or something like that, and they've seen a page of 10 different options, and all of a sudden said, no, I'm going to go do something else. I'll find something else. I'll find some other way to get access to the app. So this is a huge number. And 49% have stopped using an app because the experience of having to re-log in, having to re-authenticate, all of these things was just too confusing for them. So that being the case, if I have to force people to sign up for an account, I have to force people to do strong authentication and not reuse credentials and things like that, is it really a choice at this point? Do I either choose to be insecure and ask for no details and not drive my business forward, knowing my customers and things like that? Or do I offer sort of, other experiences that might complement and add friction and things? And so we think there's an opportunity to do both. And so I want to talk about a couple of the ways that we think about doing both. It's really important to me when I download an application, if I'm trying a new business, trying a new app, trying a new service, that maybe I'm allowed to just give it a shot. Maybe I'm allowed to download the app and start using it and not have to run through any sort of gauntlet in order to get my stuff done. And so we think about this as anonymous access or anonymous usage. And it can markedly increase the adoption of your service straight out of the door. So it's not applicable in all use cases. If you're doing something in healthcare or banking, or actually banking might be an exception, but healthcare in particular, you might not offer an unnamed experience. But how can you start to get to know a user, start to drive a profile without them ever having to type in a username and password, without ever having to link a social provider and things like that? And so the way you can think about this is starting to save state client side. And as the user progresses through, issue them an ID from your server. They get that ID on their client, they come back and access, and on your back end, you can start to say, well, they've bought these things, maybe they're accessing this, maybe they're transitioning across all of these different services, and I track that state, keep that about that user, and at some point when they've built that trust, when I've inspired them to come to me and start to do business in a more full sense, I can prompt them to upgrade and link their account and maintain all of that state and enrich that account that they've then created in my system. Obviously, I work at Google, so I say everyone should sign in with Google. You should take that with a grain of salt. I'm clearly very biased. But don't store stuff you don't need. If you don't need to store a credential or store a password, don't store it. So Google is one option that you can use to sign in with a social mechanism, but there's a whole bunch out there. And so if you don't need to have, it might be hashed, it might be encrypted, it might be salted, all of these things. If you don't need to store it, don't do it. We are mostly probably all in the business of identity, but even then, if I don't have to store that credential, there's no point to me. It doesn't add value to my business. It doesn't drive forward revenue goals and things like that. This one's really important. Listen to risk signals. So at Google, we've worked closely with the OpenID Foundation, and we have a working group, was called RISC, the Risk and Incident Sharing Coordination, RISC, but we now just call it Cross-Account Protection. And I'll go through a quick sort of sample of what this looks like in a second. But basically, if you're using Google to sign in with an account into an application or service, we at Google can send you a message to your app and say, hey, this account is under attack. It's under threat. You should do something about this. This is a standard that we've offered out there that people can integrate with, start to know this, and you can protect the sensitive information inside of your app with the signals that Google sends to you. So information about this is in the slides, but also in developer.google.com. Cross-account protection is our effort to make the internet safer. If you're using a Google account, we want you to know if there's an issue with that account so that you can protect your data. And so what this looks like is kind of like a pub sub model. I've intentionally stayed away from code, but feel free to hit me later on if you want to chat more about this. You basically subscribe to a feed. And if a Google account that is in your system has logged in with an OAuth credential, we'll basically send you this notification, this JSON blob, to your subscriber. So in this case, accounts.google.com has issued this at a specific time. So we'll give you some context there. In this case, a certain event has happened and a Google account has been disabled. So that's pretty curious. If Google's decided to disable someone's Google account, that's probably a good indicator that maybe you should do something as well. The subject here, and I can show you this in a little bit more detail later on, but we have a unique subject identifier that represents that Google account. And the reason this account's been disabled is because it's under active hijacking. So if someone's Google account is under active hijacking and less than 10% of Google accounts, hypothetically, have two-factor authentication turned on them, you might want to do something about that. You might want to take action. And so it's really important. Cross-account protection is not something we charge for or anything like that. It's something you can subscribe to, get value inside of your application or service today. I really encourage you to check it out. And finally, I have some MFA guidance. So you have to start somewhere. So start with authentication. Strong first-factor authentication, even better if it doesn't have a password, is one way to start your defense in-depth strategy for authentication. The next piece that we think about is re-authentication. So if you're building a service, you've probably got sensitive operations that you have, a lifetime. If someone authenticated 2 weeks ago and they're going to withdraw $10,000 from their account or transfer a significant amount of money between accounts, that might be an indicator for you to prompt a reauth sort of operation. Hey, I need you to give me those credentials again to make sure they're fresh, to make sure you should still have access. And then during that flow, we often obviously recommend that you do MFA. And so my MFA guidance is super simple. Use MFA, not too much, use strong factors. It's super simple, and starting to pull some of this strong factor, strong authentication methodologies in, but making them seamless, making them smooth, and doing them at the right time, so you're not just blindly prompting end users for strong authentication factors that might interfere with their experience. So we've spoken about a lot so far, and I can see I'm going to run out of time, so I'll move quicker. Anonymous upgrades, social providers don't store credentials, listen to risk signals, support epic scale. Obviously, a global scale, you can't have your service going down. Implement strong authentication, have an awesome user experience. Use standards, please use standards. OpenID Connect, OAuth, SAML, all these things were introduced so that service providers, relying parties, identity providers can all have a great relationship together and interoperate. And support strong reauth and auth standards. This is a lot. This is a ton to think about when you're starting to build an application. And unlike many of you in this room, often I'm speaking to app developers, not to identity professionals who say, you know what, I don't want to have to think about identity. Identity is the last thing on my agenda. I just want to build this app. I want to add this new button. I want to integrate with this new cool thing. So identity becomes an afterthought. And when something is an afterthought, we often find that it's not done very well. So being overwhelmed is hard and scary, but in a lot of cases, we say don't be. At Google, we build services, but we try and build services that are extensible. And so ensuring that the service we're building is extensible where it matters is extremely important. We can't build a service for absolutely everybody that fits everybody's use case and everyone's needs. So offering extensibility at the right point in time for the right use cases is super important to us. Using vendor-supported SDKs. So whoever your vendor is, we recommend that you drop in their SDK. REST calls are great, but sometimes they get a little confusing, they're harder to support and things like that. With an SDK, you drop it in, you call a method, things happen, everything is magic. So vendor-supported SDKs on the client side, on the server side are super important to ensuring that you have the right experience, the right security results and things like that. Where possible, use out-of-box sign-in and security methods. So as I said, login forms can get really confusing, really dense, really heavy, and cause users to drop off. There are industry leaders in this space that have built sign-on flows that have successfully transitioned an end user from a prospect into a customer, into a long-time customer, and maintain the security. So use sign-in providers, use sign-in forms that are targeted, that have some UXR and user experience research associated with it, so you can deliver the right outcomes to your users. Or do that yourself and start to do some A/B testing. Start to build these out and show them to customers and partners. And sort of as I was saying, don't reinvent any of these sign-up and sign-in flows. There's things out there that do this for you. So I'm going to quickly, with the 2 minutes I have left, take you through just one of these use cases in my world. Has anyone heard of Istio and Kubernetes here? Yeah, okay. All right, so there's some goodness that happens. Let me just refresh this page. All right, so we're obviously big into this at Google. Let me just log on to this service. I'm using a password just to demonstrate the functionality today. Obviously, normally I would sign in with some other account. So here I'm signing in with an account into Google's Identity Platform service. And so we obviously mint you some tokens, OpenID Connect compliant ID tokens that include all the claims and all of the standard OIDC claims that you might expect. In this case, it's telling me that I'm a product manager. I could show you through, we've got reCAPTCHA built onto this page as well. And our reCAPTCHA Enterprise product starts to look not just at the sort of, pick the traffic lights and do things like that, but also starts to run JavaScript on the page so it can look for risk, look for abuse, start to understand who's logging in, and give you a risk score between 0 and 1 that you can easily drop into your page. And so start to add Google's risk and intelligence directly onto your front door so you can decide what to do with this end user. It's present on this, I'm not going to go through it. And so in this case, I have this role of product management. Identity, as much as I like to pretend it is, isn't sexy. People buy identity to solve a problem. They're building an app, they're building a service. So there's no point in having an authentication flow if I'm not actually going to do something with it. So in this case, I've hooked this up with my Istio and Kubernetes backend. So if I hit this authentication, down here it says origin authentication is failed. So I'm trying to hit my Hello World app on the back end, and I'm showing you raw error messages here. Not sending any token through, not doing anything at all, and I'm getting this error. However, I'm then going to start to do with authentication. And so in here, we start to see this Hello World instance in the back end that I'm doing some interesting load balancing with network policies and things like that in Istio. And so what I'm doing here is basically passing this JSON web token that I got. I realize that's a bit small, but passing this JSON web token that I got from Identity Platform into my Istio service mesh. And so, let me reload my Cloud Shell. And while it's coming up, what I'm doing here is, without changing any of my application code, without changing any of my APIs or anything like that, what I'm doing is applying policies on top of the service mesh. So I can build authorization, I can build controls, I can build trusted frameworks inside of Istio without ever making a change to my application or service. And so in this case, I'm deploying a really, really simple YAML file that's looking for this role in my JOT and saying if I'm a product manager, then I'm allowed to access all of the methods, get, post, patch, all of those sort of things, and to all of the services in my service mesh. Now I could redeploy this and say, hey, only this certain service inside of my Istio service mesh is applicable, or the whole service, or a specific namespace, or whatever the case may be. And so we look at sort of this connection between a standards-based identity provider, Identity Platform is just one of those, minting standards-based ID tokens into an open source service mesh like Istio as the way that people are starting to build modern applications and modernize the existing applications that they have. I'm going to leave it there. time for some questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions, but I'm here all week, so if you want to catch up with me later on, I'd be happy to talk. Anyone got a, yeah, please.
When you talk about using MFA but not too much, what's Google's stance on this as far as frequency?
Yeah, so the question, yep. So the question was like, what's Google's stance on using MFA but not too much? We look for state changes in many cases. So if I actually had that experience this morning. I was on a plane last night, I got asked for MFA. I got to a hotel this morning in a completely different spot and got asked for MFA. That's a bit of a janky experience, but I've materially changed where I am and what I was doing and what service I was accessing. We also change based on the application that I'm getting access to. So if I'm getting access to my payroll information, maybe I have to do it every time. If I'm getting access to my Gmail, maybe it's much less frequent and only when it's contextually sensitive. Then there's also time bounds that you think about as well, like how fresh do I need that credential to be? The answer is it depends, but we have that. Come and see me after for more questions. Thank you so much. I'll grab you afterwards. Thank you, everyone. My time is up. It was great talking to you.